The topic for today is setting metrics that matter. And metrics was something that I used to be afraid of, something that I wasn't really good at. I was always better on the qualitative side. And so as I got into product management, I realized I need to improve in this area. And then specifically when I joined StatsBomb, which is a sports data analytics company, our business is selling data. So I had to, strengthen my muscles in this area. All right, let's get going. All right, so that's me. I added some QR codes there if you are interested in following me on Twitter or connecting with me on LinkedIn. I'll give you a moment if you want to scan it on your phone. This will also be shared again at the end of the presentation. All right, let's go. So what I hope you get from this is, first of all, why metrics matter. Why they're important for us in the product domain as PMs or POs. From there, we're going to touch on what does value mean, because this is really going to connect into why we measure things in product. And so we hear the value or the word value used all the time. We need to ship value. We need to create value for the customer. So we're gonna dig into a little bit of what does value mean. From there, we're going to get more specific into a framework that you may or may not be familiar with, but it's very popular, and it's more popularly called the North Star metric. It's also called the focus metric, and we're going to look at basically what is that, and break it down into categories based upon some research that has been done, and what are popular North Star metric categories for different products and tech companies. And then the last bit is we'll take all of this and dig into what exactly from these different North Star metrics, what should we measure in our products in order to tell us that we are on the right track, that our product is healthy, or to diagnose if there is a problem with our product and we are not giving value to our customers. So first up, why metrics matter. And Peter Drucker, he's written like more than 30 books on business. He's basically like credited for inventing modern business management. And he said, you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And just to connect this with you on a personal level, if, for example, you wanted to have more stamina, that's what you wanted your outcome to be, would you start by writing down, okay, step one, I'm going to buy new shoes, and step two, I'm going to get a gym membership? Would you write down your plan first, or would you start with the end in mind? What does that mean, more stamina? And for most of us, we usually start with the end in mind. And that's even if we take another example, losing weight. you look at the scale and you say, I want to be how many kilos. We do that in our personal life, but when it comes to doing it in measuring success in products, sometimes we don't do this, or we get a little bit lazy about it. And so if we do this, it becomes, common sense. So what you would do, right, is if you started with your outcome, you would say, all right, I am interested by the end of X period of time that I will be able to walk 10,000 steps a day. And so you have set your outcome right before even you've done any made a plan or done anything. And this is a common mistake in product management, is we love to think of solutions. You see it in entrepreneurship, you see it with product management. Oh, I have a great idea, right? There's a problem there, and we just jump to the solution space right away before we identify what success looks like. So if we start with an outcome in mind and work backwards, we're going to have an ability to test some of the assumptions when we start thinking about a solution to our problem. So in just this, basic example, if you're measuring like with an app like Pacer or Stevia, I think that Stavia, that's for biking. There's a ton of fitness apps out there, or a coach. If you are measuring your fitness over a period of time and you see you're going up and to the right, then you can assess as well as how you feel and whether you're feeling better. You can assess and adjust your plan, and it's the same thing with product. But you have to measure first, and so if we start with outcomes first, then we work backwards. Our hypotheses for what we want to do to solve problems, we're going to be able to de-risk them a bit further. So I have a basic process. Obviously, we can add more nuance to this, but 3 steps. If I have something that I want to improve, I identify my outcome first, right? So in my job, I develop tools that collect data. And it's important for our customer that we meet their requirements on time. So this data has to be provided to them within a certain time frame, let's say 1 week. And it also has to meet their quality standards. If they have bad data, they can, our customers are clubs, so they can open up the video of their match and they can see, oh, this video and what happened at this time does not match. And so they will come and they will be unsatisfied. So if I say, okay, I want to speed up, or I want to decrease the time it takes for our collection team to collect a certain data point in a match. I've started with the outcome. I know all of our features in my app, as you guys know in your products. You know what your product does. But I started with the outcome first. I didn't jump to a specific point or the specific feature or specific module in that in my application. And that's what's valuable to the user. And then from there, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more and identify what success means by setting my focus metric. So, for example, I could say that I need to reduce the collection time to collect this data point by 10% within a certain time frame from release of this new initiative, whatever it is. We haven't even found the solution yet. Okay. Even setting that focus metric can already toss out some ideas that may just from a product sense, not make sense. Obviously, we're going to go into the design thinking and prototype and test and so forth, but in order to do this cycle fast, we need to be able to get rid of some of that lazy thinking, and we can do so by starting with the outcome and setting our focus metric. And then we get into the strategy. How are we going to reach the goal? We start with design thinking and go from there. So when we talk about value, it's really simple. If customers find value in your product, they use it. If they don't, they stop using it. It's simple to say, right? But what I've seen and what I've done, even when I first started in product, was not understanding what value meant to the customer. I would put my own sort of bias on what the value meant to them. And so in that case, you can end up measuring the wrong thing. So if we take a step back and ask simply, what are users hoping to do with my product, right? If we can answer this question, then from here, we can identify what we can call a value moment, which is an event, an action, or it could be a chain of events and actions that represent the moment that a user found value in your product. An example of this, I don't know if you use Snapchat. Seems young, I'm a little old for that, but the younger generations do. Some of them do. And so one thing that they measure as a value moment is the number of snaps over time. Like that's a focus metric for them, consumption based, which is common for like a consumer based consumption type of product. And so this indicates quite easily to their product team that the user has found value. If this number decreases, then there's something going on. And, you know, that's another sort of discussion, you know, how to find out where the problem is, because sometimes the data itself does not tell you this, but it does indicate that there could be a problem. It could be a competitor, it could be a bug, could be a lot of different things. So, but understanding what your customer's value moment is key. And then if you understand this, then your metric that indicates the health of your business will likely be more accurate in terms of being a valuable metric. So here's some examples. Talkspace is a therapy app. And so simply, if a user completes a therapy session, they've gotten value from Talkspace. Twitch, something, again, young people are interested in. Live streaming, I think it really started with the video games, but it's live streaming of a lot of stuff now. Still very popular with video games. And the value there, the way they assess value is if a user watches 5 or more minutes of a live stream. I don't know how they come up with 5, but maybe they have tested around that. But it seems just from, you know, if you kind of weigh it in your head, 5 minutes, if you watch 5 minutes of anything, you've gotten hooked. Usually, if you're a TikTok generation, it's much less than that. DocuSign, if a user signs a contract, that's it. So DocuSign, basically the way it works is if a company needs your signature, Rather than sending it through the mail, they send it basically electronically, and you can sign it electronically and send it back and avoid all of the logistics of that. So if you sign a contract, you've gotten value from the customer. It doesn't have to be like something complicated. For us as product managers, the more quickly we can get our users to value, and the more you can signal during that journey what value is to come after, the better the chances that the customers will be retained for more value moments. When we talk about here more quickly, think about an app that I use pretty frequently is Talabat for ordering food. So from the time I open the app to the time, not that I place my order, because I haven't gotten anything yet, right? This is, if you think about Talabat from an entire business end to end, once I place my order, I'm not done yet. I want the actual food in front of me. And so for us as product, it does end at how far we can, or what the time is from opening the app to the order. But as a business, if we zoom out a little bit higher, it's from the time opening the app to when the user gets what they ordered. And that can be a metric that can be measured one level up at the business level, because there are, obviously logistics and other factors that may not necessarily concern the product at that point. And so if we go back to that original table, we can take these value moments and create focus metrics from them. So for example, if we go back to the first one, Tailspace, which is a therapy app, and if the value moment is to complete a therapy session, then we would like to track the number of users who complete a therapy session weekly, which is, a typical engagement growth type of metric that is common and is actually quite a good metric. Things like weekly active users is similar to this example metric. If we go look at Twitch, okay, and remember our value moment was watch 5+ minutes of a live stream. So again, here we're measuring the number of users who watch 5+ minutes of a live stream, but over time. So again, this is weekly active users. Now you'll notice in this example, all of these are engagement metrics, but engagement metrics, while they are popular and they work in a lot of different business models, we will see later in this presentation that other categories of metrics in terms of a North Star metric may work better for some of these different companies. So with the North Star metric framework, what we're trying to do is, once we've understood what value means to our customer and defined it, we try to turn it into a single key metric that can help our teams set further goals or metrics and measure what really matters to our customers. So one note here about the North Star metric or focus metric framework is this metric, it's called North Star because without previous technology like compasses, people needed something to navigate with, and so they would look up in the sky and use the stars. And so it guides all product teams into one direction. And that's why, if used and the team is aligned around it, which is, something that really comes into product leadership. A good, strong product leadership will align around the North Star metric often, not just at the beginning of a quarter. Then it can really help teams stay focused on the direction that the team needs to go in terms of fulfilling what the overall product strategy is. Okay. Now we're going to get into the North Star metric framework, which of all of the things that I have used to organize metrics or measure success, has been probably my favorite one if I compare it to OKRs, which we won't be discussing in this particular session. This one is my favorite. The best leaders understand that a single metric can't capture the entire picture of their business, but that one metric at any given time can be the most important. It's a balance. Brian Balfour from Reforge, which is, they provide some really, really good and expensive product management and product strategy courses. I think he's the CEO there. And I agree with him here. A single metric is not going to capture the entire picture of your business. But at the same time, and one of the mistakes that I've made, I've also seen made, is trying to measure too much and getting lost by the number of metrics that you're tracking to a point where it's just a bunch of numbers. It doesn't mean anything anymore. And so if you're trying to improve too many metrics, you'll probably not end up improving any of them. And this is really important for like early stage startups. If you're like the first product manager in an early stage startup, there's really only one thing that you should be focusing on. If you have no customers, it's getting customers, acquisition. If you have customers, then it's getting them to stay as you get towards product market fit, and so on. As a company gets bigger, then the metrics can grow with it. But even then, it's important to stay focused and not let that basket of metrics grow too big, where the focus gets lost. If you're in product, you're probably very familiar with Shreyas Doshi. And if you're not familiar with him, you should get familiar with him. Seek him out on LinkedIn and Twitter and follow him. When he talks about North Star metrics, he says great PMs look for a metric that have these 4 qualities. And we'll talk a little bit about each one of these qualities. The first one is that it's responsive to product changes, meaning that if we, for example, release a new piece of value to the customer in 1 week, we are able to see in our metrics whether it had an impact or not. If we cannot see that, then it's not a good enough North Star metric. Second criteria, he says, is that it is an aggregate measure of the product's value for its users. So an aggregate measure, and this is kind of actually similar to the first one, because if it's an aggregate measure of the product's value, then it's going to be affected by almost any new change in the product that we do. The third criteria here is can be readily tied to value for the business or to broader company goals. So usually at the business level, we're measuring revenue. And sometimes North Star, even at the product level, is revenue. And we'll see some examples of that. So for example, if our broader company goal is to reach a certain ARR by the end of 2022, then our North Star metric could be increasing the number of weekly active users. That would fit these criteria that we're talking about here, because it would be sensitive to growth. Which is something you'll see Brian mention in the next slide. And then the last criteria here he mentions is expected to remain relevant for a reasonable duration of time, at least 2 to 3 years, which makes sense. It needs to be something that we can look back on over time and assess. That way, it's stable. It's a stable metric for us to use. This is Brian, as I mentioned. And he says, he breaks this down, and you'll find what he says is very similar to Shreyas. He just says it in a different way. So most products should have four high-level metrics: an acquisition metric, a retention metric, an engagement metric, and a monetization metric. If you've ever seen the very popular AAARR funnel that was popularized by, I think, Eric Ries in the Lean Startup book, this is, very similar. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's his name. It's been a while since I read that. So what he's saying is these metrics, they act as a system where one can influence the other. And this is, each of these 4 metrics is pretty common across different business models. So that they can be tracked in a traditional SaaS, they could be tracked in a marketplace, they can be tracked in a user-generated content type of business model. But he warns us that trying to improve all metrics at once really isn't possible until you get to a much later stage, what I mentioned before, because teams have to be dedicated to each area. Imagine 1 or 2 PMs trying to move, these different levers for a startup. They would struggle to, they might be able to affect one of them, but it would be very difficult to affect all of them at the same time without, growing. And so because of that, product leaders need to understand which one is most important at any given moment. So if we have these 4 general categories, depending upon where we are in our business, acquisition could be more important, or it could be improving engagement, where if we were, a scale up. And these are tied, because when you have improved engagement, this is a leading indicator that retention could also be improved. But for leaders, we need to define which one is more important at any given moment. So we're about halfway through. I'm hoping to allow for a good amount of time for questioning, so we might go a little bit longer than I expected. I think this last bit might take 15 to 20 minutes.
تمام. طيب يعني حابب دلوقتي يحيى interrupt the presentation with questions لو حد عنده على حاجة عن في حد يا جماعة عنده هو أنا شايفة comments أصلا في الشات. I think كان في حد اتكلم وقت ما اتكلمت على الفاليو مومنت، هي دي الأها مومنت ولا لأ؟ I think كان أحمد رد عليه. لو عندك تعقيب يا يحيى تقدر تعقب. هل في حد عنده أسئلة يعني لحد اللحظة اللي احنا فيها؟
Oh, the aha moment. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very similar concept where the user realizes, aha, this is why I'm using the product and why I'm happy to use it. Thanks, Ahmed Ismail, Muhammad Osama. Thank you. Was there another question?
أنا مش شايفة raising hands ومش شايفة question.
أنا كنت عايز أسأل برضو عشان مسألة ال four main matrices أو matrix. أنت ممكن تمانج إزاي أو شايف إزاي ممكن تمانج between ال North Star metric والmain four matrix اللي أنت كنت لسه بتقول إن إحنا المفروض نتمركز حولهم يعني.
Yeah, we will get to that actually in the second part of the presentation. So just hold that question and hopefully it will be answered.
طيب يلا بينا يا يحيى let's move on.
Okay. So another person, if you're not familiar with, is a good follow both on LinkedIn and on Twitter, Lenny Rachitsky, former lead PM from Airbnb. And he broke North Star metrics into 6 categories that what he did basically was he did a survey of a lot of different startups in different stages. A lot of them are really scale-ups and more mature companies. And he basically asked them what they used for their North Star metrics. And from that, he broke it down into these 6 categories. So what we're going to do is go through these really quick. And then at the end, we'll do a little bit of an exercise, sort of a pretend company that we have. So 6 categories of North Star metrics. The first one is revenue. And he found that this was actually a surprising find to me, that it was the focus of around 50% of companies. It's actually the North Star metric for my company, Statsbomb. And it's just simply the amount of money being generated. This can be measured in ARR, which is, annual recurring revenue. This is really a very popular metric for SaaS, or GMV, gross market value. And this particular metric is most common for marketplaces and platforms. One of the things that I forgot to mention is the North Star metric needs to be something that indicates rather easily whether or not this company is growing, because that's what we care about. So there are a number of different ways we can look at growth, and you'll find in these categories the different ways that growth is looked upon. Now, revenue, in the survey, I also found that these companies that look at revenue also look at other categories for their product North Star, because revenue by itself isn't a great product North Star. It's a little bit high. It's more of like a business North Star metric. But for some, it makes sense, like Coinbase, for example. The second category is customer growth. And that's simply just the number of paying users. And he found that around 35% of companies use this as their North Star metric. That can be measured in simply the number of paid users, or it can be measured in market share. This particular category is most common in freemium team-based B2B products like Slack, or consumer subscription products. Duolingo is an example for that. Market share is an interesting one. It's not used by too many. Figma uses it. Actually, whenever I was at Wazaf, market share was a North Star metric, but you can only use it when you know the primary or main players in your industry. So if you think about design tools, I can almost name most of the major players like in my head. You have Sketch, Figma, Adobe, XD, Envision, and maybe one or two others. And so that's why Figma looks at market share and monitors that closely as a North Star metric. The third category here is consumption growth. And that is basically the intensity of usage of your product beyond simply visiting your site. And this is something like if you have a product and you want to measure consumption in it, or the value moment is something that the user consumes, then this would be a good North Star metric. So for example, booking.com could measure nights booked, or Intercom, which is a customer tool that is primarily used for customer service. You can see like the little chat thing on websites. The number of messages sent. So if we're tracking that and that continues to rise week over week or month over month, then we can immediately tell that our growth is healthy. Another type of company that this is most common for also is user-generated content subscription products like Loom. So Loom, what Loom cares about is, if I remember correctly, the number of, or the number of minutes, the number of videos that have been watched for X number of time. It's actually very similar to Twitch. And they can tell immediately based on that, if that number is going down, then users are not consuming the product. Actually, I think I'm incorrect on that. I think it's actually user-generated videos, the number of videos that people make, not watched. We'll have to double check that. But in either one of those, if that number is going down over time, then it's an immediate indicator of the health of growth. So the remaining three, the fourth one here is engagement growth, and that's probably the one that you may be most familiar with. It's the one that I'm most familiar with, and that's just the number of users who are active in your product. For us as product managers, though, we need to define what active means, and so that could be doing a specific action, or it could be simply opening the app, but that's not really, if you have an application, it could be opening, but that's not going to tell you too much. So it's better to actually link it to either a value moment or another key action in your product to describe what an active user is. This particular category is most common for freemium team-based B2B products. So for example, like Airtable, or if you've ever checked out Bubble, which is a no-code solution, they also I think they're using daily active users as their North Star metric. But this one is very popular, so it goes across business models. Facebook very popularly tracks daily active users, and I think I can't remember what active meant for them, but I think it was opening and being engaged with the app for X number of minutes. But someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And consumer subscription products as well. This has a focus of about 30% of companies, but I've actually seen this to be more popular than that. And I'll get to it a little bit later, why I particularly find engagement growth to be one of the easiest categories to set for a North Star metric, and more, most common. One of the least common ones is growth efficiency. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but think of if you are a direct to consumer business, let's say you make a mattress, right? And you ship this mattress directly to customers. This is a very operation expensive business. And so for a company like that, it would make sense for the North Star metric to be margins. Another company that, or another type of company that has very high expenditure, maybe not in operations, but in customer acquisition, is any of these apps that you have to do like a lot of Facebook ads on or Google ads on. So for example, Calm. How does Calm get users into their funnel? They blast ads everywhere, mobile, Facebook, and so on. And so for a company or product like Calm, it would really make sense to have their North Star metric as lifetime value over cost of acquisition, which is LTV divided by cost of acquisition. Basically, in simple terms, they want to make sure that for every dollar or every pound that they spend to acquire a customer, that they're getting the return on capital. And the way to measure that is if they get $5 from a customer, let's say that's the lifetime value of a customer, and it costs them $1, then that ratio is 5, and that's healthy. Now, if their ratio is flipped, like it's 0.25, then obviously that's not healthy, costs too much for a customer that maybe stays for 2 weeks and then they churn. And so this would indicate that the growth was not efficient. And so this is most common for paid growth businesses. Lastly, there's a category that he just simply calls WOW, or sorry, he calls user experience. That's the logo. I put WOW, but you could think about it. That's a good way to think about it. If a user leaves your experience saying WOW, and that is basically the measure of how enjoyable and easy to use customers find the product experience overall. A really good example of that is Superhuman. If you're unaware what Superhuman is marketed as an email solution for people who want to get to inbox zero. So people who get all kinds of cold emails, hundreds a day, and they want to get by the end of the day to inbox zero. So they have created a user experience unlike what we're used to in Gmail or Outlook that facilitates this for their users. And they simply measure it by something like an NPS or customer satisfaction score, or what have you. And so something like that, you could use an NPS for your North Star metric. And this is most common for products that really differentiate on UX. It's very, very niche, and you'll probably not find it as common as some of the other categories. All right. So we've talked at a pretty high level about a lot of different metrics and categories and all of that good stuff. Before we finish, let's do an exercise to break down the metrics further. And this is where we can address one of the questions we had about 15 minutes ago. So let's pretend we are the product team at Netflix, and we need to define our metrics. Now, I was going to take more time and kind of crowdsource this, but I think I'm just going to jump to the solution so I save more time for questions. And what I mean by solution is it's not, there's no right answer, but this is the approach, and this is just an example that I found on Mixpanel that was really interesting, and I've actually used this in the past for my own purposes. So if we're a content streaming platform and we wanted to set up our North Star, if we think back to all of the different categories that we talked about, a lot of them could fit. But in this example, we're going to choose an engagement growth North Star metric, and that is weekly active subscribers, which is just, we just substituted the word user for subscriber here. And why does this make sense as our focus for North Star metric? This, it's very common in a lot of product companies, as I mentioned before, is because it meets all of the criteria that Shri has talked about. It's a stable metric. It's something that if we make product changes, we will be able to see it reflected, although in a lagging way, which I'll come back to that in a second, which this is why we're going to have, you know, further break down the metrics, but we will eventually see it. And it also gives us a little piece of all of our metrics that are below it. So if we have reduced engagement, it's going to reflect on the active subscribers. If we have churn, that's also going to reflect on the active subscribers. We'll catch it earlier with level 1 matrix, but as I mentioned, in a lagging way, all of these things can be seen and measured by measuring weekly active subscribers as our North Star metric. Now, the question earlier is what exactly, how can we like break this down further if we want to break it down into activation, engagement, retention, and so forth. And so what Mixpanel calls it, they break it down into level 1 metrics, and then you can go further and break it down into level 2 metrics. And it has our typical breakdown of activation, engagement, and retention. They've also added 2 other categories called reach, and reach is differentiated by basically any of our user or any of our subscribers, whether they're active or not. And that's what's going to separate that from active users. And then they've added also a business specific metric. And we'll get into these in a second. So actually, let me go back to reach here. So one more thing I'll note here. What they have done is they've added an owner for each of these. In a lot of cases, you know, product and marketing work together. or product and content. This doesn't necessarily have to be true. This is just the way they've broken it down for this example. So if we wanted to break this down into these categories, if we started with reach, then what we would be doing is just simply measuring the number of subscribers that we have. That is our reach as a product. And if we wanted to break that down even further into level 2 matrix, we could measure this by how many are new, how many are retained, and how many are reactivated. And that could be defined over time, depending upon our product. So for a streaming product, 7 days would make sense. Activation here could be measured by subscription over 7 days divided by new users. And what that tells us is in this period of time, how many of those people who subscribed from the new users of the pool of new users subscribed in 7 days. So if we think back, like that tells us like, did they find that aha moment as soon or as quickly as we wanted them to? And if it takes our users a long time to activate, then that should give us a leading indicator that we haven't pressed their value button yet. We haven't delivered it. And so that's where we come down here to the L2 metric, and we could just simply measure how long it takes from them becoming a subscriber or a user signing up to the time that they subscribe. Now that they're an active user, we can start to see, okay, they found content, right? Or they found something that is valuable to them in our product. But how valuable is it? And that's what we're looking at when we look at engagement. So here we can set our L1 metric to be minutes viewed over weekly active subscribers. And that is if that is going up and to the right, then we as Netflix are producing value to them, and it is something that is keeping them engaged with our product. So how valuable, that's the question we're trying to answer. How valuable? If that number continues to increase, then yes, we can answer that question. If we see that it is decreasing, or if we break it down to the L2 metrics, did they actually like complete the content, or was it just a video start, for example? This will break down and answer that question. Well, how valuable was it? And so we have these level 2 metrics for this engagement level 1 metric that tells us, okay, for example, the video starts over weekly. How many people over our weekly active subscribers actually started something? And then break that down further to how many of those completed it. And that can give us an indication of, how valuable are we to our user. And that is, if we go to the next metric, that is really together with retention, because when we measure engagement, we're measuring value in the snapshot, but when we measure retention, we're measuring it over like a measure of time that is stable that we've hit the sweet spot with them. And so that's why you often hear a lot of people say that retention is the most important metric for product market fit, because it will tell you whether or not you've hit their sweet spot. So engagement can only do that for the snapshot. Retention can do that over time. And so for our L1 metric, we could look at, again, because this is Netflix, so you don't want to measure this over like a month. You could maybe measure it over a day, but for this example, they've chosen a week as being sufficient, because they may have had data saying, well, people don't watch Netflix every day. So it would be a more realistic measure to use a 1 week period of time. And if we broke that one down even further, and then, so they want to measure like the content as well. So that one of Netflix's part, well, the main content, the main product is the content. So are they retained on the show? Which is, a big deal for Netflix. They spend most of their money on these original Netflix series. So if somebody starts something, are they retained for that specific piece of content? And then finally, you could have a very business specific type of metric here. And in this example, they're using average revenue per subscriber. And that's not the month. It's basically like another way to measure the lifetime value of a subscriber. So if that number continues to go up, that means retention is also going up, and it's possibly correlated with good engagement as well. If that number goes down, you'll see the opposite effect in possibly retention and engagement. And so all of these, if there are enough people to focus on them, should be focused on. And they're all levers to our North Star metric of weekly active subscribers, because if we're not getting them in and at the beginning of the acquisition funnel, that affects the WAS. If they're not activating, then they're churning off early in the beginning of the customer journey, so that's going to affect WAS. How much are we hitting their sweet spot? We can check by engagement and retention, and that is going to affect our WAS. And just for purposes of measuring the growth or a business specific metric, average revenue per subscriber, while not necessarily affecting our North Star metric, it is still useful as a metric to measure the health of our product and business overall. So I really like this framework, and the way specifically Mixpanel, they have a guide which I can send you guys the link to for this, that gives you enough metrics. And I sometimes stop at just L1 depending upon my team, but gives you enough metrics and enough levers to focus on what matters. But ultimately, if you don't choose the right focus metric, then these won't matter. We ended on time. Thank you so much. And let's have some questions.